Welcome to another edition of HorseCenter, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I'm joined by my fabulous partner, Matt Skaggy Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm great, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I love the photos, all those wonderful photos behind you today, Matt. Yes, folks, we are talking about Wise Dan. It's going to be a Wise Dan edition of HorseCenter today, Matt. One of the best horses we've seen in the 21st century, to be sure.
I remember on a lot of our Horse Center shows that we've done talking about the excitement of Wise Dan. So it'll be terrific to go through his career uh, for all the fans.
And what a career it was, Matt. It lasted 5 seasons. We thought we might get a sixth season this year, but it was not to be, of course. The announcement of his retirement with a small tendon tear came in last week. The Woodbine Mile was his target he was going to run. It's going to be run Sunday without him. A little anticlimactic in my eyes. 11-horse field, no Wise Dan. In total, Matt, Wise Dan won over $7.5 million, better than 70% of his 31 career races. 6 Eclipse Awards. Was he a deserving winner of all those Eclipse Awards?
Well, that was certainly a conversation that happened back in those in 2012 and 2013, and I think it was the beginning of some changes that ended up happening with for this year's Eclipse Awards. But that's in the future. And 6 Eclipse Awards for Wise Dan, 3 in 2012, 3 in 2013. Older male, grass horse. Horse of the Year. I don't care what you want to say. He deserved all of them in those 2 years.
Yeah, he deserved them. And Matt, the big ones, of course, are Horse of the Year, and he won it 2 years in a row. Not many horses in history can say that. I know Charlie Lepresti thought maybe he could win one last year, 4 for 4, but yeah, 2 Horse of the Years in a row. Special horse. Matt, he wasn't just a grass horse. I was there the day he broke his maiden at Turfway Park. It was the second start of his career. He won by 15 lengths on the poly track at Turfway. He was a monster on synthetics. But I'll always remember that, being there the day Wise Dan broke his maiden in sensational style.
Yeah, and he didn't go on to the grass for a good long part of his career. I think, Brian, it was a 10 start maybe before he got on the grass.
That's right, Matt. And he was an excellent horse. I mean, he did get better as he got older. But let's remember, this is a horse that ran in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, 6 furlongs on the dirt in only his 5th lifetime start. Interestingly, Matt, Charlie Lepresti told me that before that maiden race that I saw, his 2nd lifetime race, Morton Fink, the owner, wanted to run him for a tag. Could you imagine if Wise Dan had been claimed before that it all broke open?
That could have been the greatest claim in history, or who knows? It may not have ever gotten to be the Wise Dan that we know.
The Wise Dan that we know. Okay, so he's not just a turf horse. Ran in the Breeders' Cup Sprint as a 3-year-old. Of course, folks, he didn't run as a juvenile. Ran in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Didn't have the greatest of trips. Didn't get it done in the Breeders' Cup Sprint as a 3-year-old. But then he came back at 4, and he was good. He was good on synthetics, as you said, and dirt. Ended the year with a big win in the Clark, Matt, and I think we're going to take a look at that now. Dirt, Grade 1, Churchill Downs, farther than a mile. Wise Dan dominant.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about all of his achievements on the turf and then go back to think that he could win a race like the Clark, the importance of the Clark against that kind of field also. You got to remember that. And even before the Breeders' Cup Sprint, he won a graded stakes race sprinting prior to the Breeders' Cup Sprint. That horse could run, and he was fast going short.
He was fast going short. That race is one of the oldest in all of racing, North America at least. That's the Phoenix Stake at Keeneland. So a big sprint, and one that produces Breeders' Cup Sprint winners, as we saw last year with Work All Week. So yeah, sprinting, he did it going 2 turns. He did it on synthetics. He did it on dirt. The Clark was awesome. And he came back a couple races later the following year as a 5-year-old, and it was a great race, a roughly run race that Grade 1 Stephen Foster in the summer. But he got edged out at the end by one of your favorites, Ron the Greek, And he never raced on dirt again after that, what I thought was a big performance.
Yeah, and I guess he could have done some great things on the dirt. And I remember at the end of some of his big campaigns, and part of the discussion was, well, let's see Wise Dan on the dirt. But phew, he got on that grass, and he was close to invincible.
Close to invincible, close to unbeatable. He was something else. You know, Charlie Lepresti was willing to try him in the Breeders' Cup Classic going 10 furlongs on the dirt. Morton Fink was a little bit more the impetus for keeping him on the turf. And Matt, you know, we can't complain too much about Wise Dan's career becoming just about all turf. It probably kept him sound longer and around longer, and we're all thankful for that.
Yeah, no question. I think, Charlie Lepresti, the way he handled Wise Dan, it was always with the utmost of care, and it was always about Wise Dan and being careful and prudent with the races that he went in.
Someday when I have horses, Matt, Charles Lepresti will be on my short list of trainers I would like to use. So he did go after that tough defeat in the Stephen Foster at Churchill Downs on the dirt. He did become basically a turf horse, and that season, that 5-year-old season back in 2012, culminated with the Breeders' Cup Mile, his first attempt at the mile, and it was all.
Yeah, it absolutely was, and that first turf start, I think, was in the Firecracker. The first time that he would win the Firecracker in his career, step right up and win a Grade 2.
There's some good memories from that race, the Firecracker. I remember a move up the hedge in a driving rainstorm. Wise Dan knew how to get to the wire first, as you see in the Breeders' Cup. And you know, something else that came out in the Breeders' Cup, Mats, these Breeders' Cups that he ran in, but the fact that Europeans come over here, and Europeans, their running is done on turf. Our running is done more on dirt. We're a dirt country still. And the fact that Wise Dan defended our turf so very well. Uh, Europeans could claim dominance on turf all they wanted, but as long as we had Wise Dan on our team, it was hard to say that we wouldn't have our big day in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, and over in Europe, that mile on the turf, that's a coveted crown to be the best miler in Europe. And over here in America, we do the mile, but we do the long, we do the mile and a half, and we have a whole mixed bag with the turf. So beating the Euros in that mile race is, you're beating some just superb grass horses.
Yeah, and in 2012 he was dominant in the mile. It was a wonderful performance. And then 2013 he was probably even better, Matt. He had a long winning streak on the turf, as you said, nearly invincible, nearly unbeatable. Matt, the only time he lost in 2013, you remember what happened in Keeneland, another driving rainstorm, and this time they took it off the turf, and
Yes.
that his old friend Silver Max got out there and on the wet poly track, that was only Wise Dan's only loss of maybe his best season as a 6-year-old in 2013.
Yeah, and right. If that race hadn't come off the turf on that day, um, we know what would have happened.
We know what would have happened, and the winning streak would have been just gigantic. So he comes to Santa Anita once again for the 2013 Breeders' Cup Mile. By that time, he was the hero of American racing. He hadn't lost on turf for a long time, and I remember thinking just for a little while, as became true later in his career, boy, does Za Proval, the pretty white horse, does he have a shot to win this at one point just outside the eighth pole? And bang zoom, wouldn't you know, Wise Dan turned on the afterburners that afternoon at Santa Anita.
Yeah, because on that particular day, I think he got a little bit farther behind in that race than in some of his other ones. And getting ready for the show, I was watching that replay again, and it was like, wow, when's he going to make his move? And when he turned it on, it was all Wise Dan.
Do you think Wise Dan, do you think this son of Wiseman's Ferry gave his regular rider, Johnny Velasquez, any reason to be confident?
I think Johnny V must have loved riding Wise Dan, whether he was stuck on the hedge or swung out wide or a little farther behind or closer to the pace. I don't know. That must have been some thrill, knowing what you had underneath you in those huge, huge races.
And knowing what he had underneath him, he sure did. Easy to be confident. Wise Dan. Matt, there's nothing, sometimes we see these huge performances where you win by 10 lengths or you set a track record here and there. Not that Wise Dan couldn't do all that, but a nose for the wire. We want to see our horses win. We want to see our favorites win. We want to see the horses we bet on win. And Wise Dan, obviously, most of his career losses came early in his career when he was still putting it all together in big races early on. But Wise Dan, more than any other horse, maybe, Zenyatta withstanding, had a nose for the wire.
He sure did.
Wise Dan was super, and last year, there were things going on. He was a 7-year-old in 2014, and there was an injury. There was colic where it looked a little scary, and Wise Dan kept coming back. Perfect 4 for 4 again last year. He won some of his races last year in tighter, more thrilling style than he had previously. Matt, I was at Keeneland for the last one. Just an amazing experience. The crowd excitement when Wise Dan looked like he might be in trouble again for a little while, and then he turned it on down the Keeneland lane. He knew where the wire was, and the fans appreciated it.
Yeah, and like you said before, Brian, I'm one of those race fans where I love to see the stars, Wise Dan, American Pharoah, whoever is. I love to see the stars run, and I love to see them win because there are stars. I want them to win, and I know people bet against them in those situations, but if they could win 20 in a row, I'd be happy.
Yeah, I'm with you, Matt. Stars of racing are good for racing, and Wise Dan was truly a star. I'll never forget. I'll never forget the Shotwell Mile. I didn't know at the time it was going to be his last race. Of course, he had another little thing come up, missed the Breeders' Cup. But I'll always remember my feeling. I'll always remember who I was around, and I'll always remember the crowd's emotion as Wise Dan came rolling down late in the Shadwell Mile and won like he almost always did. Wise Dan, what a great horse. Did you think he was coming back this year, Matt? It sure looked like we had a good chance to see him as an 8-year-old.
It's things sounded good, but I was waiting to see. He is 8 years old, and it gets tougher to come back. And it just didn't happen. But it's all good that the career of Wise Dan. When you look back at what he did, 2 horses of the year, 2 firecrackers, 2 Breeders' Cup miles, 2 Woodbine miles, 2 Shadwell miles, 2 4-star Daves at Saratoga, 2 Makers miles. Wow, that is some resume.
Beloved everywhere he went. I think Lepresti was honestly as high on him as ever. The way he was training at his home base in Keeneland before bringing him back, before the setback that eventually ended his career. Do you have much doubt that he would have won in Woodbine on Sunday? Because I don't. I would fully, 10, 11 months off, whatever it was, I fully expected him to win the Woodbine Mile, $1 million race against top turf horses, first time back as an 8-year-old. That's how good Wise Dan really is.
Oh yeah, I completely agree, Brian. I totally expected him to win. I was looking forward to watching the race on Sunday and seeing another charge down the beautiful turf course at Woodbine. And that was one of his most amazing races when he won that Woodbine Mile in 1:31 and change on a particular day. And the race call of the track announcer that day was just amazing when he said Johnny V gives Wise Dan the nod, and his response was immediate. It was just, I love listening to the race calls of these great moves of horses like Wise Dan.
Yeah, well, we brought up 5 races that we wanted to show you on this HorseCenter, but by all means, go to YouTube and check out so many more from Wise Dan. Great horse. I think, Matt, we should really thank Morton Fink and Charlie Lopresti for keeping him sound, keeping him healthy, keeping him around as long as he did. And then finally, maybe most importantly, knowing, even though this might have been a very small injury, knowing when to pull the plug and keep Wise Dan happy and healthy. I'm sure he has another good career in front of him.
Yeah, and I think the word is he's gonna retire and live on Charlie's farm, not far from you, Brian.
Yeah, I'll have to visit him. I'm sure he'll be a great help to the younger horses, kind of showing them the way a little bit, if you will. Uh, this has been a great horse center for us, Matt. We both loved Wise Dan. This one's for you, Dan. Dan the man, one of the great horses, soon to be a Hall of Famer in about 5 years. I hope you enjoyed watching our Wise Dan retrospective. Thanks for Ember for producing, Ember Marr, a wonderful producer. Thank you, Matt.
My pleasure, and thank you, Wise Dan.
Thank you, Wise Dan. As always, we're brought to you by Horse Racing Nation and Derby Wars. We'll see you next week.